If you grew up in emotional chaos, you probably learned to be nice as a survival strategy. Not necessarily kind or compassionate, just nice, agreeable, easy to deal with, always trying to smooth things over. Hi, I'm Madalena, and this is You Reclaimed. Here we talk about how to take our lives back from the lasting effects of childhood trauma, of anxiety, and emotional dysregulation, so that we can finally live on our own terms. Today I want to talk about why being nice can actually be a trauma response. When you're constantly trying to avoid conflict or keep the peace at any cost, it's not about kindness, it's about fear. You learn that if you were calm and quiet and agreeable, things would stay safer. Less yelling, less drama, less pain. Scanning the room for moods became a kind of superpower. You learned to soften your voice, to minimize your own needs, to make yourself as little and unnoticeable as possible. You smiled when you didn't feel like smiling. You said yes when you wanted to say no. That kind of niceness was never about being kind. It was about keeping yourself safe at a time when you didn't feel safe. So what does it look like when we use niceness as a coping strategy? Well, we keep the peace. We avoid conflict. We live small to stay safe. But the thing is that being too nice always comes at a cost. We might keep the peace on the outside, but inside we start to disappear. We feel invisible, disconnected, confused about why we're always so drained or frustrated. Because it takes effort to suppress your own wants and needs, and really to suppress your identity. Yes, risking vulnerability by expressing ourselves also takes effort, but at least it gets us better results long term. Because disappearing doesn't feel good. It doesn't make us feel connected to our partner or to our friends, and it definitely doesn't make us feel connected to ourselves. It doesn't let people get to know the real us either. Making ourselves small means that we put up a facade. We show a limited and safer version of ourselves. And then we wonder why we end up in relationships that don't satisfy the real us underneath this facade. Well, how can they if we're trying to hide in plain sight? So being too nice comes at a high cost. And that's because niceness, when it's rooted in our fear of abandonment, slowly erodes our sense of self. It eats us from the inside out. The problem is this pattern doesn't go away just because we grow up. In fact, those of us who learn to be too nice as children still carry that pattern into our adult relationships. So in your efforts to use niceness as a strategy for self-preservation, you might avoid setting any boundaries. Or you might feel guilty when you do say no. You might constantly take responsibility for how others are feeling, or suppress your own preferences to keep the peace. You end up feeling resentful, but then you blame yourself for feeling resentful. And let's call this what it is. It isn't just a pattern, it's a coping mechanism. And coping mechanisms are subtle, they're sneaky and automatic. We don't even realize we're doing them until we're exhausted and overcommitted and resentful. Does that sound familiar to you? You're not broken. You're just stuck in a pattern that's very familiar to you and that kept you safe at one time. When nice is the only safe option you know, everything else feels dangerous. Here's the truth. Real kindness includes boundaries. Real compassion includes self-respect. And you are allowed to be direct, clear, and assertive, even when it makes someone else uncomfortable. Let me repeat that. You are allowed to disappoint people. In fact, disappointing people is part of this human experience. You're not responsible for managing everyone's experience of you. We get so good at seeing ourselves from the outside to make sure that we're doing a good job of being nice, of staying in line to make sure that we don't lose love or lose care from the people that we care for ourselves. It's a hard truth for those of us who learned that our job was to keep the emotional peace at all costs. But here's what no one told us. When you try to make everyone else comfortable, you end up abandoning yourself. And nothing but self-hatred and disappointment comes out of that. So breaking this pattern might feel terrifying. It might go against everything we're used to doing. But saying no and being honest and holding the line on what you find acceptable and what you're not willing to tolerate, those are the things that build real, respectful relationships. In healthy relationships, we fail each other sometimes. We don't have a choice because it's impossible to please another person at all times. If our focus is only on keeping the other person happy, it comes with a cost. And that cost is often our own unhappiness. So when someone crosses a line or blows through a boundary that you know is important to you, this is where you have to insert the power gap, that space between the trigger and your reaction. The moment someone pushes your boundary or you feel the guilt rise up in you for wanting to stand up for yourself, pause. That right there, in between trigger and reaction, is the moment to get curious, to ask, what do I need right now? What's the truth beneath my habit of letting people disregard my boundaries? Am I letting this happen because I don't care about this boundary, because this is not an important boundary for me? Or am I letting this happen because I'm afraid of what will happen if I reinforce it? And often when we live in fear of the consequences of setting boundaries, we can't see past that fear. Our fear is so deeply embedded into who we are that we don't know what life would look like without it. We think that holding the line on this boundary or the next one is what will cause people to abandon us. We think this is what will make people want to leave us, to stop loving us, or to stop caring for us. And here's the kicker. Sometimes we're right. Sometimes setting a boundary does cause someone to pull away. But if someone only wants to stay close when you're abandoning yourself, do you really want to keep that person close? So we have to practice setting boundaries because we're not used to exercising this ability in ourselves. Maybe we know what this looks like in other people. Maybe we see our friends doing it, but we have no experience doing it ourselves. So we assume that enforcing strong boundaries in our own lives will ruin our relationships. But that's not the case in healthy human connections. People who are emotionally balanced and in a healthy place will also have solid boundaries that you in turn will be expected to respect. In fact, strengthening our boundaries is the only way we end up in relationships and friendships as well that are healthy and respectful. Get used to the idea that people pleasing is a reaction and that setting boundaries is a choice you actively have to make. You get to reclaim that choice. You get to learn the difference between being kind and being nice, between guilt and allowing growth of your own identity and of your own needs. You get to set the boundary between people pleasing and real, genuine connection. You're allowed to take up space, and you're allowed to say no, and you're allowed to live your life based on what you value, not what makes everyone else happy. If this resonated with you, tell me in the comments. Have you been too nice for too long? And if you found this helpful, hit subscribe. We're building something here and I have a lot more to share with you. See you in the next video.